Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Brian Schettler, partner at the Boeing Horizon X Fund. Brian, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Thanks, Nicholas, and thanks for the invite. So for me personally, my path into venture in the first place, pretty unorthodox, as I think many that get into corporate venture maybe agree with. But I was an electrical engineer. I got started in aerospace and defense right out of college and was quickly enamored with the technical side of aerospace, but growing into more strategy, corporate development, and transaction-oriented worlds. I was really blending internal innovation with outside innovation and how we could bring that together. And a lot of M&A deals, a lot of corporate partnerships. And it was really before sort of corporate venture in aerospace was a thing. I navigated a couple other aerospace companies across my career, and then had the privilege of about 5 years ago now, joining Boeing and launching a corporate venture capital fund from scratch. They were creating a new centralized innovation arm. They wanted to tap into the outside world, but they didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how corporate venture could help. They knew that it should, but how it would work inside of Boeing explicitly was to be determined. So I literally showed up at Boeing with a blank piece of paper and the task to design corporate venture capital unit that would work, not only for aerospace in general, but getting things to work with your own corporate culture is the devil in the details. So over the next 5 years, we really had the chance to integrate an outside external innovation program with Boeing technical experts. The early days were fraught with cultural dynamics, antibody rejection inside of Boeing, and really trying to get buy-in to the program so that we could create value, right? We are, as a true CVC, wanting to do more than just the investment. The investment is the means to get access to the capability and to support and grow startups around the world. But at the end of the day, if you aren't translating that into value creation inside your corporate parent, it's really no different than just being an investor off of your pension fund or the like. So over those 5 years or so inside of Boeing, it was a great time. We executed about 40 direct investments in startups around the world. We deployed roughly a couple $100 million in capital across those investments. We like to target early stage companies so we can really ensure we're at the key decision gates to make the tech successful for aerospace, given the unique barriers to entry, regulatory dimensions, and the like that comes with aerospace. And we've had some exits. And so I'm really excited to talk about that more and other topics, Nicholas.
Very nice. Thank you, Brian. I think I can speak for everyone listening in. We want to learn more about the hybrid model, best of both worlds. Can you walk us through how you build buy-in? And especially you talked about delivering strategic value. How did you define it? And I'm sure it's not from your perspective, but actually from Boeing's perspective. How did you articulate it?
So the buy-in comes in many ways. I mentioned the antibodies that come out at the beginning, right? Something that looks different, something that looks threatening potentially to R&D, the Boeing way of doing things. It's hard to sometimes appreciate 105 years of company history has so much passed down knowledge in addition to the knowledge of the folks that are there today of the Boeing way of doing things that you really are acting as a change agent from day one. I will admit we got some things wrong very early in the Boeing Horizon X Ventures days, simply because we thought our purpose was so strong that it was going to be obvious to everyone, right? And so we just started executing and thought others would jump on the train with us as we went, that it would just be so clear that this is capturing value that people would be dying to help us. In fact, the opposite was true. They saw us moving forward and they hunkered down even more or became even more passive to embracing this sort of capability. And we had the support of the CEO, we had the support of the CFO. So you still think, hey, I have that top-down champion, so it'll just work itself out. Big companies, it doesn't work that way. You have middle layers and you have obstacles that you don't even know are there, but they're quietly working in the background to maybe not actively make things complicated, but they're certainly not making things easier. And so we pivoted quickly when we saw this coming up to a much more engaged effort across the organization. I built up a team around portfolio development. We now call it applied innovation inside of Boeing. And they're sitting in the technical community and they reside and report into the chief technology officer. And that can bring some respect and assurances that we have the best interest of the chief technology office at heart. And we're there to build relationships. It's a communications journey, right? If people are left to interpret the purpose of the venture unit on their own, most people go to their skepticism or dark place, as I call it, right? Versus a much more active and embracive approach to roadshow the venture platform around the organization, to communicate not only the relationship and partnership we want to have with the technical community, but also the benefits that can come. And then once you start showing some of that success, when you have a couple of near wins of how we've embraced a new capability and it's turned into cost savings or new revenue or new capability for Boeing, then you just use those examples to showcase others, and it's contagious at that point. It's like, oh, wow. Yeah, they were able to do it there. And boy, that didn't hurt anybody, or that wasn't threatening to them. They actually had a better outcome. They performed better. Wow, this is great. And then other areas jump along. But I boil it down to just one simple premise: over communicate, Nicholas. The more you showcase and communicate with your partners around your corporate teams, the better off it'll be. Don't let people interpret things in isolation and potentially stay passive or, at worst case, become obstructionists.
I really like it. I think over communicate is such good golden nugget. What's interesting, and maybe I would push back a little bit, is over communicating at the very early stage where you have nearly no portfolio companies. Once we have portfolio companies, and then once you start to be having early successes, which you can communicate about. I want to dissect the 3 stages, because when you talked about this applied innovation to CTO, if you had started with no portfolio companies, that team would have nothing to do. So can you walk through the over communicate for the first stage where you've just started? Then once you start to have a portfolio company that's big enough to actually engage more deeply. And then once you have already early successes, can you walk through this step 1, step 2, step 3?
So step 1 really is just getting the buy-in to the purpose and communicating why we're doing this. We're not doing venture capital to fire more engineers inside of Boeing, right? Which is something they can be concerned with. I'm not doing venture capital to steal R&D fundings from engineers. And so it's really just communicating some of those basic principles. And you're not talking to them. You're having conversations and open dialogue. You're listening, you're hearing their questions and concerns, and you're communicating how this all fits together, right? And then what you do is you also, I would say, show the engineering community that you're serious about this, of pulling them into the overall sort of process. Pull some of those engineers into the mix. Hey, what do you think of this technology? And that goes a long way. So that's the communication at that stage. Then when you have a deal scoped, you feel like an investment is on the horizon, really where we get a lot of success is then bringing a group of stakeholders into the mix to really flush out, okay, now to a real tangible level, how are we going to work together? What is going to be that initial proof of concept? What is going to be some tech exchange or joint IP development or any kind of program that might, play itself out? But again, it's bringing those engineering teams and others along with the journey so they feel like they're part of the creation, as opposed to something that just was thrown over the fence to them. Then when you have an active proof of concept going or active results are being achieved from the integration of portfolio company capability and Boeing capability, and that's where you have to be shouting from the rooftops and communicating across the organization how it's delivering outcomes to Boeing. And this is where you get others involved, not just the technical communities, because they've been with you on the journey all along, but the business development communities, the program management communities, the P&Ls of your organization. That this is actually, maybe it's not moving the needle in like big company sense of like delivering billions of dollars of orders, but it's moving the needle on innovation and new opportunities for Boeing and the startups in the long run.
Very nice. And then I want to triple click on this applied innovation reporting to the CTO, because it's clearly an innovative setup where you're building a team that actually doesn't report to the venture team.
Yeah.
By the way, where did you report in terms of Boeing Ventures?
When I was still inside of Boeing, we reported to the chief strategy officer.
The fact you reported to the CSO is clearly a very strong signal. You're looking at long-term strategy and you're going to make investments along that. What I like about this team that reports to the CTO is that you're showing this direct connection between your investment and building the roadmap. But you don't control that team anymore if it doesn't report to you.
Correct.
How do you ensure that this actually works as you intended, especially when you mention antibodies? Here, you're basically killing the antibodies. But how?
We had 5 years of history inside the company, so I didn't have to do the explanation of why we're doing this anymore. People understand why we were doing venture. So I wasn't fighting those antibodies, but really how applied innovation stays successful in the CTO's office is a fundamental, we have an aligned interest here. We haven't talked specifics, but Boeing is still the largest limited partner in my current fund, and it will be a major limited partner in future funds. So it has a direct benefit to the success we're able to deliver from an applied innovation front. So if that applied innovation team does more adoption, does more insertion of this capability to market channels, which makes the startups even more successful, that's going to spring around to Boeing being such a exposed LP in our fund, and it'll get better returns. So it gets the double whammy. It gets the value from embracing the tech and selling it in its channels, and then also the return from the fund. So that at its core is enough to say, gosh, applied innovation is an entity worth resourcing, and we're going to keep the team in place. Because otherwise the model dissolves a little bit, or it's not as effective as it could be. Given that you're really just justifying some headcount and some R&D dollars to work some proof of concepts together, I think it's a good business case and good return. But to talk about applied innovation a little bit more about really what's unique about it, it's more than just our passive interface. We have so much exchange, and it's a bidirectional exchange of information and capability. That's really what makes it unique. So applied innovation has an entity called emerging capabilities. And what they're trying to do is really aggregate the needs and wants of Boeing, whether explicitly provided by the technical teams or implied based on this team's own independent assessment of where Boeing's weaknesses might be, where the opportunities could be in the future for disruptive technology. And critically, like, where are the gaps along the way that we have to fill and find in the outside world, because it's just better than trying to create it yourself. And so that team is a key interface with us to help inform where might exciting deal flow and opportunities be to disrupt aerospace. And so we're doing our own scanning on the outside, but it's nice to have this sort of whisper in your ear of, wow, there are some really exciting opportunities for growth if we find a startup that can do X.
So many golden nuggets. But one thing I'm starting to realize is one of the secret weapons, in a way, of this, because you can rely on a team that has operationalized best practices to bring this value creation. You said earlier, investment is a means to value creation. How do you make sure this transition doesn't destroy that value creation, but actually you're keeping that team intact, right? Can you share how much would be or would not be possible if you didn't have this applied innovation team already in place with a very clean reporting line and very clear deliverables?
Yeah, no doubt it's the secret weapon. And in fact, I use that exact phrase when I talk about it, whether it's folks inside of Boeing or when we're talking to startups and trying to advocate for our involvement or showcasing why Horizon X should be an investor in a particular company. It really is something different in and of itself. That said, I won't say it's impossible to be successful in this hybrid model without it. It certainly doesn't have to be resourced as large. Maybe our applied innovation team has stood up. But I think fundamentally, though, you need to have alignment on the principles of what you need to keep that value creation story going. We toyed with the idea of just keeping a team inside the chief strategy officer and building it out that way. And maybe that would work in your particular companies. But for us, again, back to the engineering dominated sort of culture, the CTO office was the ultimate place for us. I just think at the end of the day, the best deals out there are becoming more and more competitive, right? There's capital everywhere that good startups are getting exposed to. If you want to make the case for why a startup should be looking at you as an investor, why they should focus their time and attention to working commercial deals with you and not somebody else on their screen, on their cap table, like these sort of things, I think make a difference. We're putting real money where our mouth is, but via the investment, but we're also bringing a dedicated team. And this is what they do 100% of their time. This isn't like a 5% portion of their day. And really they're doing internal innovation the other 95% of the time. This is robustly compartmentalized for this sort of activity to be the key interface to us and the key interface to the portfolio companies for Boeing. I'm a huge believer in it.
Very nice. And in a way, they are the perfect value add fee for you because it brings this team. And you even mentioned the concierge service. So it's not a generic response to every startup's. Concierge service means you're really looking at each startup with their own needs. Now, for anyone who is listening and that is, wow, I want to try the hybrid model, do you have a word of caution for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You cannot at all make the interest in pursuing the hybrid model come across as self-serving, right? Yes, it's good for all to have a little more independence for speed. And yes, it's better for team composition and long-term retention to be able to pay them more market standards for venture. Yes, but that is not the primary reason for doing it. Primary reason for doing it is to expose yourself to broader sources of capital so you can make bigger investments in the startups, you can make more investments in startups, and you can support your corporate parent by giving them the ability to roll some of the investment they might have otherwise made in just equity to instead operationalizing capability so it jumpstarts and accelerates that advancement in your respective industries and your respective companies. I would just avoid that other scenario I talked about of how you try to socialize it.
Very nice and very candid. Thank you. And so you convinced Boeing, they agree with the structure. Maybe the one thing that's interesting for us to understand is when you went to these other potential LPs, did you bring along your CSO or other people from Boeing to show full commitment to the process? Or you didn't need to, and it was really you raising the fund?
I didn't need to, but I had the discretion to pull that cord if I needed to. So again, having the buy-in from your chief advocate inside your corporate parent, in my case, the chief strategy officer, that's always great to know that you can call on it. But we had developed a fund deck that outlined the portfolio, the successes to date, the new structure, and it was more just one-on-one engagement with these LPs to talk to them about the opportunity, and that was enough.
Nice. And for LPs who are considering your fund too, so maybe those who are listening in, you're still investing from your fund one, which you have recapitalized and cleaned up and everything. How should they think about when you're going to invest from fund two versus still a few investments from fund one?
Yeah. I think in an ideal world, you have some overlap, right? You are winding down your investment activity, but still in a very heavily focused maintenance mode and company engagement. Yeah. While at the same time, you ensure you are now scouting and investing in those new deals and getting back to the early stage investment of new companies that really made you successful in the first place. So to me, there's nice overlap, and that's going to be what happens in 2022. You're going to have this sort of wind down maintenance period of fund one, and then you're going to have the accelerated sort of growth of fund two, where you're not only raising the capital, but you're deploying it at that next tranche of early stage companies.
Nice. And of course, with the fund two structure, the way you describe it, that gives you options to recruit different profiles than you could do before. Now, having the option doesn't mean that you should take advantage of it. You may want to continue recruiting the same profiles you had before. So how are you thinking about what type of profiles and talents you want to recruit for your fund too?
Yeah. I'd say if anything, the thing that changes is really thinking now, what do we do with access to more capital? When you're inside the corporate, yes, you might have some earmarked annual dollars. This is how much I want you to invest and everything. But you also think things along the lines of what's the minimal amount I can invest in this, given that it's Boeing's balance sheet. I'd argue now we're going to have access to more capital than we ever did at Boeing. And so I want to start thinking about from a profile perspective, like when do we go bigger earlier? When do we think about larger ownerships on the cap table? When you're in a corporate, I'm sure it's similar for others. There's like golden rule, hey, let's not go over 20% ownership because then you can consolidate financial statements and it becomes messy. That's different when you're a fund manager, right? You can take more than 20% ownership if it makes sense for that investment. And then the other part, which we really haven't talked much on this session, Nicholas, is the connection we have from the Aero Equity and the AE industrial side of the house, which is the legacy private equity side. We get extended resources and value from them as well, right? Of, gosh, they have $3 billion of assets under management of aerospace grade portfolio companies. They're also deploying money to acquire companies, to invest in companies that are at growth and sort of buyout level stages. And so how do we think about that from a long-term integrated strategy of, hey, we can invest in companies at the early tech stages out of the venture fund. And then when they transition to growth or even eventual buyout, we have the private equity side that can help with even bigger checks. We can help with SPACs. We can help with IPOs. We can help with private buyout. And so that's really the part that as we get to fund two, we're really going to be able to think more about the architecture of our long-term investment strategy in each of these companies.
I can't stop thinking that for any entrepreneurs who are watching this video, you are becoming such a more compelling place for them to get investment from. Before you had clearly Boeing and all the value creation. Keep talking about bidirectional, which I really like this term. Right now, you're starting to think even more like a financial VC. You start to have even more capabilities than you could before, more options than you could before. And if you choose your LPs, you could actually even have more tool set that you can bring to them.
Exactly.
It sounds too good to be true. So maybe we're getting to the top of the hour. My last question for you, and this is really for potential co-investors, but also entrepreneurs who are listening in. What are you excited to invest next? What are the themes or investment theses that you want to share so that people know how to reach out for the right opportunities?
For me, Nicholas, we obviously wouldn't be successful if we weren't trying to address the aerospace needs of the future and how we fundamentally can transform the future of transportation. And that doesn't just mean, hey, what might go on an airplane? There's so much more to that. And it's software, it's hardware, it's cybersecurity, it's infrastructure. And I just fundamentally believe the world that we're living in now is going to look so different from a transportation system in the next 10 to 20 years. You're going to have new levels of electric propulsion and mobility. Think of what Tesla is doing for the ground. You're going to have a similar transformation in aerospace. You're going to have new modalities of how you get from A to B, not just hub and spoke networks, but other ways of urban mobility and other forms of transportation. I'm really excited by the sustainability journey that aerospace is now finally grabbing onto. It had been resistant to change in that world, or frankly, even a bit just dismissive of what it was contributing to overall kind of carbon output and maybe putting in the too hard categories. That's too hard to replace jet fuel with something else. But we're seeing that groundswell of change happening, not only at the big companies like Boeing, but even at the innovation levels of, hey, how can we make the world better with electrification or with hydrogen or with new sustainable aviation fuels or taking out carbon from the atmosphere. So I'm really excited by that world. So I know that's a lot, but if you're dealing with hardware, software, sustainability, space, connectivity, industrial manufacturing and automation, I want to hear from you because I think there's exciting things we can do together.
Very nice. And you can count TDK Ventures as interested on the cross mobility and sustainability. Brian, thank you so much. You were super candid and sharing so many details. I think it was super, super good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicholas. Great being here, and take care, everyone.